For my non-biblical reading this morning, I'm reading from Parker Palmer's latest book, On the Brink of Everything, Grace, Gravity, and Getting Old. I don't want to fight the gravity of aging, its nature's way. I want to collaborate with it as best I can, in hopes of going down with something like the grace of the setting sun. For all the wrinkles and worry lines, it's a lovely thing simply to be one of those who's lived long enough to say, I'm getting old. We have no choice about death, but we do have choices to make about how we hold the inevitable. Choices made difficult by a culture that celebrates youth, disparages old age, and discourages us from facing into our mortality. The laws of nature that dictate the sunset dictate our demise. But how do we travel the arc between our own sunrise and sundown? Is ours to choose? Will it be denial, defiance, or collaboration?
Let's hear from 2 Timothy. As for me, my life is already being poured out like a libation. The time of my dissolution is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now a laurel wreath awaits me. On that day our God, the just judge, will award it to me. And not only to me, but to all who have longed for Christ's appearing.
Would you pray with me? Ancient One, as we gather close to this All Hallows Eve, may we be aware of the thin veil that separates us from whatever comes next. May we gain your wisdom, your hope, your light, as we ponder our own mortality and remember those who've gone before us. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your insight and your wisdom. Amen. There's really no way to celebrate this day without reflecting upon our own mortality. But I think that's a good thing. I think, like Parker Palmer says, we live in this culture where youth is celebrated and where, denial of death is sort of the norm, where health professionals are mostly concerned with fixing everybody and healing everybody and how long can we keep people alive instead of respecting and honoring the natural cycle of things. But it's so important, I think, that we pause and take time to reflect on the fact that we're human and we have a finite amount of time in these bodies. And I don't say that to be depressing or to be morbid or to be anything other than this is reality. And I think there's a benefit to thinking about it. Anybody want to help with that? What's beneficial about reflecting on our mortality?
Making the most out of now.
Making the most out of now. Is that what you were going to say, Julie? To appreciate living in the moment. Because we get so distracted and so focused. It brings us back to, wow, this moment right now is good. I'm sitting up, taking nourishment and breathing. And I can see the beauty of the leaves outside. What else?
Take away the fear of dying.
We can take away the fear. If we actually spend time with it, perhaps it'll calm some of that. What else?
Making amends or saying things that have been unsaid.
Sure, just to make amends, to say things that have gone unsaid, to recognize that life is fragile. And we shouldn't wait to ask forgiveness or to give forgiveness or to say those things that we should say, because you don't know. What else?
Create a legacy.
Robert?
Create a legacy.
Create a legacy. What does that mean?
Well, your behavior and how you live your life, and also your financial gifts, and what you want people to remember you.
So all the ways that you want to be remembered, the way you live, the way you act, the way you spend your money, the way you share your time, your talents, your gifts, all of it. What do you want it to look like? Yeah. Shirley?
It makes you reflect and not worry about the small things.
Sure. It reminds you of what's important. It brings some perspective back to life. Don't sweat the small stuff, right? I think all of those things create a healthier way of being in the moment. Clearly, the scripture that Bev read is Timothy reflecting on his own mortality. And he says, you know, my life is already being poured out as a libation, which is a sacred offering. It's already being spent and being poured out. He said, but I've fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I've kept the faith. You know, the last couple of years of Paul's life were pretty rough. By his own hand, we know that he was whipped 5 times. He was beaten 3 times. He was shipwrecked 3 times. He was persecuted. He was hungry, thirsty. He was imprisoned. And so for him to get to that point and say, you know, I've fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I've kept the faith, is pretty literal. He did fight the good fight, and he didn't give up. And he didn't sacrifice his integrity, what he believed in, and what he felt called to do. There are a lot of us that might have, myself probably included, that might have gone, you know, I've got a nice, comfy bed, rather than dealing with all of this pain and suffering and heartache. Would have said, no, don't need all that. I'm not a big Paul fan, by and large. He and I and his theology don't always get along real well, but I can respect his devotion, his integrity, his tenacity. You know, I'm hoping that none of us have had to endure the kinds of things that Paul had to endure. But we all have our challenges. Every life has its challenge and its struggles. You know, there's the old story about how if we each took our troubles and put it in a brown paper bag and we threw it into a really big pile of brown paper bags, would you want to pick somebody else's? And by and large, the answer is no, I'll stick with my own problem, thank you very much. Because we don't know what's in all those other bags, right? So every life carries something that's a challenge and a struggle. And so I think there are ways to take this phrase of Paul's from close to the end of his life and to apply it to any of ours. To broaden the meaning, to broaden the understanding so that it applies to us. What does it mean for us to fight the good fight, to finish the race, to keep the faith? I mean, if we make that broader, what does that look like? Anybody? I mean, it doesn't mean, okay, I got shipwrecked and I swam to shore and I kept going.
Hard work,
Hard work.
good choices.
To make good choices.
You look out for the other guy.
To look up, say that again?
Look out for the other guy.
To look out for the other guy. To have compassion. To be an advocate. To stand up against injustice. What else?
Perseverance.
Perseverance. To keep on keeping on. Every time you get knocked down, you get up again. Yeah. It's instead of just giving up, saying that's it, I'm isolating, I'm watching Jeopardy for the rest of my life, I'm done. Right? Not that there's anything wrong with Jeopardy. What else? Honesty. To live with integrity. True to yourself. I think there are all kinds of ways that these things can apply to ourselves. Rachel Raymond tells a story about leading retreats for medical professionals. She said oftentimes medical professionals are used to backing each other up in difficult situations and respecting expertise and respecting advice, but that very often they don't open up enough to get to the deep meaning that their work might have for them. And so these retreats are structured to do that. She had one retreat of 8 health professionals. And there was a woman there by the name of Marie, who was a young nursing administrator. During this retreat, one of the ways that they used to help them to open up about the meaning of their work was a sand tray exercise. How many of you are familiar with a sand tray? Okay, so a sand tray in therapy is basically a tray of sand, a couple inches thick. And you're asked to pick out items that symbolize things for you. In this case, it was to symbolize what their career meant to them, what their work meant to them. So they went into a room with all kinds of little things, it's often little statues of different people or different things from nature, maybe shells and rocks and pine cones or candles and other inanimate objects that could be turned into a symbol, a metaphor for life. So these 8 professionals were invited to go into a room and to pick out some things that symbolized what their work meant for them, to come back, and the sand tray was divided into 8 sections, to place it in those items in their section, and then they would describe to the group how those symbolized what their work meant. Well, Marie went, she picked out her items, and she came back and placed it in her section, but she kept one under her chair, which was really interesting because they were all told that they had to use all of the items that they brought back with them. So the professionals started talking and started sharing their portion of the sand tray. And about halfway through, she started to explain the pieces that she'd placed in the sand and what meaning they had for her. And she got done with that, and then she paused. And she said, I have one more item that I'd like to place in the tray, but I don't want you to see. And she asked them to all close their eyes. And while they did, she took the item out and she placed it in the center of her portion of the sand tray. And when they opened their eyes, they found that she had placed a tall, white, unlit candle in the center of her tray. And it was obvious that this was emotionally difficult enough for her to even do this. So Rachel handed her a box of kitchen matches to light it, and she just sat with those matches for a while before she got up and she lit it. And in a very soft voice, she explained that that symbolized her true self. And it was powerful and intimate and clearly difficult for her. But the others started talking after that. And eventually the woman next to her, a professional psychiatrist, talked about the things in her tray. And there was also an unlit candle in her tray, a short little fat one. And it symbolized to her her dream of being a professional with an open heart. And she took her little fat candle and she leaned over to the other part of the sand tray and she lit it from Marie's candle. And Marie burst into tears. And immediately the woman was like, I'm so sorry, I don't know why I didn't use a match to light it. I shouldn't have, encroached on your part of the sand table. I'm really, really sorry. And Marie stopped her and said, oh no, that's not it. She said, there's so much cynicism and judgment between all of us that I have been so afraid to share my real self with anyone other than my patients. Should my patients know who I am? But I'm afraid of being made fun of. I'm afraid of being thought less of. So I don't show my true self to anyone else. And the fact that when you took your candle and lit it for mine, she said, for the first time I realized how it might be important for me not to hide my real self. That maybe I can have the courage to start to be really who I am. Because maybe there are other people out there like you who are hiding too. And there was silence for a moment. And then they reached out and grabbed each other's hands. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. Maybe for Marie, it meant that the good fight was going to be trying to live true to who she was. To have the courage to show her real self. To live with that integrity. And for the psychiatrist woman to live with an open heart. There's so many, many things that it can mean. That I leave you with that question today. What will it mean for you to get to the end of your life and to say, I fought the good fight, I finished the race, I kept the faith? And once you know what that looks like, how does that mean you need to start living if you're not already?